Hello, everyone. We're going to get started here with our webinar. I'm Josh from Orchard and Grove. I'm the head of engineering here. And I wanted to welcome you to our NoMAD Login Plus overview webinar. Login Plus is specifically made for Okta users right now. And today, Joel Rennick is going to walk you through a demo of our new software that'll help you reimagine the login window at your organization. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button in the Zoom client, and then we will either answer them live or we will answer them back with a text message. So at any time that you have something that comes to mind, just press the Q&A button and type it in, and we'll get to it as soon as possible. Joel, are you ready to go?
Thank you very much, Josh. Good morning, at least here in where we are. Good afternoon, good evening, as we have people from all over the place here. Thank you very much. As Josh mentioned, I'm Joel. We're here to talk about NoMAD Login Plus, which is something we've been pretty excited about to be able to put together, and a lot of the cool things that I think we've managed to do with that. And as always, we're recording this, and we did a webinar yesterday on this as well. So if you have any friends, colleagues, family members that weren't able to attend this one or the previous one, we should have the best of the two up on YouTube here probably about the next couple of days, by the end of the weekend at worst. So without further ado, as Josh mentioned, I am Joel Rennick, founder, creator of Orchard and Grove, which is our parent company here that's created all the NoMAD products. And if you're new to us, we do have quite a few versions of Caribou now. We've been excited to have started kind of in the Active Directory space, but then being able to kind of take our products and ideally yourselves, our customers, into places that may be a little more appropriate for the future going forward. So real quick, this is NoMAD. Name comes from No More AD. This is our founding product, been out for well over a year now, and was originally designed to allow you to kind of do AD integration without the bind. So the ability to have Kerberos tickets and things like that without having to focus on the AD plugin and having a little bit more flexibility. Entirely open source. Get your Kerberos tickets, certificates, and password synchronization, which is the biggest reason why a lot of people use it. But since we think we've kind of solved many of the issues that users may have directly with AD, we've started to get a little further afield into things like an action menu, file shares, and then allowing the user easy interaction to maybe services or other facilities in your environment. And with that, we have taken a lot of that idea into the next couple of applications that we have. This is an app that we haven't talked much about. This is NoMAD PKINIT. Allows you to do smart card authentication via NoMAD. Very cool stuff, but it's for a fairly specific audience. If you're aware of Crypto Token Kit and Token D, we use both of them. If you're not aware of them, don't worry about it. We can use hard or soft certs, and then we have a full-blown command line tool that allows you to do PKINIT from the command line. Very cool stuff there. We have a couple of very cool places that we're at with that. If you have interest, please let us know. We then started about a year ago on a product called NoMAD Pro. And NoMAD Pro was brought up to us by an organization that said they had a large number of Macs in two different groups, and they were interested in kind of merging them together. However, that was going to require two different domains to be collapsed into one. And the concept of unbinding thousands of Macs from two different AD domains and rebinding them to a third was very unexciting. So that's where NoMAD Pro came from, similar to NoMAD, with the main difference being that instead of using AD for authentication, it goes back to Okta instead. And so we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward here, show you kind of some of the new things that we've been working on there, and then also discuss how that interacts with NoMAD Login. Important to note, this is a separate product from NoMAD Login. You don't have to use them both together. There are some cases where one may be more appropriate than the other, as they do cover kind of two different aspects of this. So that's the NoMAD family, and then NoMAD Login Plus. If you were with us about a month or two ago, Josh had a webinar on using NoMAD Login AD, which is our open source version of this. And so this is NoMAD Login Plus, which shares a lot of similarity to NoMAD Login AD, but then has a few differences, most notably the fact that instead of using AD, in this case, it can go directly to Okta. We're looking at providing other cloud identity providers as we go forward, as we've heard a lot about Azure, Google Identity, paying one login, and a few others. So we're hoping to encompass all of that in an OpenID Connect fashion, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through this. So, but first we can get into the login window. We have to kind of get into some of the login window basics. And there's some important things that we need to kind of focus on here so that you have a better understanding of what we're doing with NoMAD Login Plus, and then also how it interacts with the rest of the system. Some of this is because whereas NoMAD has a lot of different configurations that are available to it, it's a little bit more easier to play with, to tweak, and the workflow, even though there's a lot of variations to it, is a little more linear. When you start getting into the login window, you have a much larger multitude of options that you can have for how to phrase different things, how to put different events in different places. And so as we go through this, we want to make you aware of kind of that flexibility, as we've had some very, very cool workflows that customers have presented to us that we're very interested in supporting. So first of all, the login window itself, an application, it's in there. It runs various things called mechanisms. There's about a dozen of them. We're going to show you kind of a more in-depth list as we go forward here. These mechanisms are run one after the other, and all of them have to agree to allow the user to sign in. Now, some of these mechanisms have UI. For example, the login window that most people refer to as the login window is just one mechanism that displays a username and password interface for the user to put the username and password in. There are then other mechanisms that run that do things such as actually validate the user, enable file vault perhaps, set up home directories, do various Kerberos, PKINIT, or just general ticket management. So there's a number of other pieces that go along with a login window process. Right? Some of them will run as root because they have to do things such as mount file shares to set up the home directories and things like that. Some of them will run as the security agent user. The security agent user is a much more limited user. There's a lot of things that it can't do, and that's designed for security. And for best practices, Apple recommends that anything that's using a user interface and interacting directly with the user runs as the security agent. So that way you've just got some containment if anything untoward were to happen there. So that's kind of the basics of the login window. And what we have done is we have created a plugin for the login window. Now, important to keep in mind, we are not replacing the login window. The login window binary itself is exactly the same. What we have done is we have removed one mechanism, replaced it with our own, but left the remaining 12 mechanisms in place. We'll show you that in a little bit. This is all using standard Apple APIs. There's documentation on this, and we adhere to all of that. Also very important to keep in mind, the OS itself does the actual validation of the user. What NoMAD Login Plus does is it will take a username and password. It will validate that against Okta in this case. And if that works, we can create a user on the fly. Just-in-time user creation is a pretty exciting thing we've done here. And it will then hand off that username and password to the OS. The Apple mechanism to validate the user is still the one that ensures the user is the right username and password. We haven't messed with that. We have no intention of changing that. We want you to benefit from any sort of updates and other things that Apple does, and also for all of the security rigor and other things that have gone into that mechanism. So again, we try to keep a very light approach where we've only added things where we have to. We leave the vast majority of the Apple pieces in place. All right. The NoMAD Login Plus mechanism does use the Okta Authentication API. So this is an API from Okta that allows for kind of a RESTful JSON interface that you can use. It's really good stuff, and it's the reason why Okta is the first cloud IDP that we were able to support. So with that in mind, what do you have to do to enable Okta for this? Absolutely nothing. You're more than welcome to use NoMAD Login Plus without making any changes to Okta. Well, we don't recommend this. If you don't want to talk to your Okta administrator, you don't have to. Now, keep in mind, anything along these lines, we'd like you to be very aware of what's going on in your environment. Make sure everybody else is aware of this as well. However, like I said, we use the Okta Authentication API, and that works out of the box. There is no API key that's required, and it just uses your standard Okta endpoint. So it is fairly simple to be able to get in and start testing with NoMAD Login Plus. And then all of the configuration from the Okta side is done in Okta. So we don't require you to make any sort of configuration changes there. And as we go forward with the product, we're going to have even more things as far as provisioning, specifics around MFA usage and things like that will all be done directly into Okta. We have no intention of having any sort of console or cloud service that is a part of NoMAD Login Plus that isn't one that you already have. So to really get into the way the login window works, the first step is to head on down to the command line and to do a security authorization DB read system.login.console. This will use the security command to query the authorization database and then do a read of the system.login.console write. When you read that in, you'll get a big chunk of XML that will look something like this. And this is the list of mechanisms that are actually going to be run during a login window process. So you can see up at the beginning, there's a built-in policy banner. This is specifically the RTF that you can display before a user signs in. So that's the mechanism that does that. The second one there, that login window login, that's the actual UI run by Apple to collect the username and password. You then have a variety of other mechanisms that go down there. About halfway down, you actually have built-in authenticate, privileged. That's the actual mechanism that validates the local user and ensures that they're actually the right username and password that the system thinks they are. That mechanism runs in a privileged sense, which means it runs as root. So adding the privileged at the end of that string ensures that it runs as the root user. Everything else without privileged runs as the security agent user. So about halfway down is when the user is actually authenticated. You then have a number of mechanisms that happen after the authentication piece to do things such as set up MCX, manage preferences, also mount the home directory, things like that. And then finally, you have the login window done. So what we're doing is we're taking that login window login mechanism, and again, that's just the UI that asks the user for their username and password, and we're replacing it with two of our own. We have a couple other mechanisms as well, but for the basic usage, this is all we need to do. So we have a NoMAD Login Okta. That is our plugin or bundle of plugins, if you will. And the first mechanism that we have is CheckOkta. This allows you to display your own UI with your own logos, with your own customizations. And that will actually do the validation using the authentication API against Okta. That mechanism does not need to be root, and since it shows UI, it really shouldn't be root. We then have a second mechanism, NoMAD Login Okta CreateUser. This is what allows us to do the just-in-time user creation. All right, and what happens is that we'll validate your user account against Okta. If in fact Okta says you're good, then we trust you. We trust Okta, and we look for a local user account. If that local user account doesn't exist, we will then create one on the fly. And this is the primary workflow that we're seeing a lot of the early accounts that are using this do. In particular for the DEP, Device Enrollment Program, where you want to have user creation a little bit more constrained than just having the user type in any username and password that they want to in the setup assistant. So in those cases, again, we validate the user name and password against Okta, and then we will create a user locally based upon that username and password. We will get a little bit more of the user record from Okta as far as the username and things like that. We will create the user record on the fly, and then the user will be a plain vanilla local user. They can be an admin or a non-admin. That is one of the options that NoMAD Login Plus has, so you can kind of specify that through a preferences file. So you've got a lot of bit of flexibility to do that. And in the case, and we'll show you in the demo, when you're using it in the device enrollment program, we can suppress all of the user account creation. So the user never has an opportunity to create an account. Instead, they kind of click like 3 times, I think is all it is, keyboard language, and then they immediately go to the login window. This would be your branded login window and would then allow you to have them enter in their Okta credentials. So CheckOkta, this is the main mechanism that we have. It defaults to local authentication first. The major workflow that we wanted to solve, and the first workflow that we wanted to solve, was to have users be able to walk up to a machine where they didn't have an account, sign in with their Okta credentials, and a local account would be created for them. For any account that already exists on the machine, by default, we will go to local authentication first. So if you walk up to a system and you already have a user on the system, you try to sign in with them, we will look for that user being local. If that user is local, we will then authenticate you locally. However, we do have an option to always authenticate to Okta. So if you do have a lab system or something that you want to have maybe a little bit more security on, we can force all of the authentication to go directly to the network. Now, this may be a little bit harder for mobile users. So keep in mind, if you do turn that on, every authentication goes to Okta, not just when you want it to. So offline authentication gets a little bit harder. If you do set that up, we do have the ability to have some exceptions so that you don't always have to be going to Okta. You can have some users that are a little bit more limited in that they will only authenticate locally. Also, keep in mind, a really big thing that we wanted to support, and we'll show you an example of this here shortly, is that we do support all of the major MFA options. So all of Okta Push, Okta SMS, Google Authenticator, Duo, Security Question, and there's a few others that we have in there. All are available to you, and it's one of the big things that we have customers being very interested in, is that you can now provide multi-factor authentication at the login window. So some really cool things we're doing there. If there's an MFA option that we don't include, please let us know, because in most cases we've been able to add them in about an afternoon. Okta has a number of them that it supports. We find that 90% of users are only using 4 or 5 of them. But if you do have one that's a little more exotic, we'd love to talk to you and see what we can do to put it in. Usually it's just a matter of a little bit of UI to configure. Our custom login UI, very similar to NoMAD Login AD. You can change the logo, you can change a background picture. We're working on a few other options here as we go forward as well. But for right now, this gives you an example. This is the login window. That's our Orchard and Grove logo there in the middle. And then we've picked, I think that's the snow desktop picture, which I think really works out well. You're more than welcome to have this set to anything you want. All of this is done through a configuration profile. There is a caveat that you do have to have these graphics on the machine in that the configuration profile just points to the actual images. So some cool stuff that you can do there. We're working on even more ways as we go forward to make this a little bit more customizable for your needs. The other major mechanism that we have a lot of people using is then the CreateUser mechanism. So as mentioned before, this creates a local user account with the same username and password as your Okta password and username. We've got a preference setting, so it can be either an admin or a non-admin account when you set this up. We're working on even some more ways of varying that, so you can have some users be admins, some users be non-admins, and a little more configuration. We have another mechanism. This is a big one that a lot of people using our NoMAD Login AD product are looking at, which is a DeMobilizer. So this mechanism will, if a user signs in and they happen to be a mobile account locally, we will demobilize them. And the really exciting thing that we have about the login window is you're in this very unique space within the login process, in that as a mechanism in the login window, we have the ability to be root. We have the ability to be the user. In many cases, we know the user's password, or we can be a security agent and show UI. So with all of those options, we can do some really, really cool things. And demobilize is one of them. So while you may have seen Rich Troughton, Lisa Davies, there's a lot of good work that's been done out there about removing users and demobilizing them. So you can use those scripts. They're good scripts. Many of you might be using them. However, you can occasionally run into some quirkiness because you're effectively doing a brain transplant on the live patient, right? And that's when you're going in and a user is already signed in and running in the Finder, and then you're changing them from a mobile to a non-mobile account. In our case, we can do this as a login window mechanism. There's no UI, it's silent to the user. And when the user signs in, we look for the particular attributes in their user account that will mark them as a mobile account, and then we will remove them. And we can remove them in the time between when they sign in with their username and password and when they actually get to the Finder. So we're never having to kind of change the user record out from underneath them after they've signed in. So again, a great example of some of the cool things that we can do at the login window in a nice handy way of demobilizing accounts. Important to keep in mind, we will not unbind the user from AD using this mechanism. Instead, this is designed to be kind of in a lazy way, allowing users to log in and log out as they need to. So over the period of a couple of weeks, a user will demobilize themselves when it is most appropriate for them. So a cool mechanism to keep in mind, part of the NoMAD login mechanism list. We have another one, enable full disk encryption. In this case, enables file vault on login, particularly that's 1013 and APFS volumes. If both of those are in place, we are able to turn on file vault as the user signs in for the first time. Using some of the other things, the profiles and what have you, many cases you'll have to restart or at least log out of the system as the user before file vault will be able to kick in. We can do this on initial sign-in. So some really cool stuff there that we can do. If you are using your normal MDM environment to do any sort of personal recovery key escrow, all of that works perfectly fine with how we do this. We're effectively doing an FDE enablement with the FDE setup command, and it works very similar to what you would do if you were to use that manually. And if asked, we can write out the personal recovery key locally as well. If any of you out there are using Crypt, this is a very similar kind of process and mechanism to the Crypt project. Crypt is much more functional if you're getting into hosting your own escrow service and things like that. And NoMAD Login Plus should work well with Crypt. We've had a few people that were working on some specifics there for some different environments. But if you're using Crypt, there's no need to stop using Crypt. You can still keep doing that. If you want something that's a little bit more lightweight or kind of all-in-one, then we have that functionality as well. So the use cases, like I said, originally it was just for a device enrollment program set up. How can we get that first user on the system? How can we just make sure that Fluffy Bunny 75 doesn't show up the username? Instead, we actually have the username that we are expecting, and that we have some a little bit of clarification and validation on the password, that it's of a specific level of complexity before we come into there. So that's what we wanted to do originally. Got all that done. And we were thinking that maybe you would just use the NoMAD Login Plus login window once. That users would come up, you would have them initially enroll with that login window, but then after that, you would revert back to the standard Apple facilities. And that's perfectly fine. We don't have any problems with that. We're not offended. And we will have some workflows where that's the case. And if you're at all concerned about Apple changing things or just not wanting to have to think about, does the login window need to be updated, whatever else, you're more than welcome to remove our login window after first use and move back to the Apple one. However, what we have found is that a number of places are very interested in this because now you have the ability to have other IT admins walk up to these machines and sign in. So if you have an environment where a user is working along, something happens and they need some help, they drop off their machine at the help desk. Of course, they don't leave their password. They shouldn't. And then they wave goodbye and they wander off to lunch. You're now left with this machine that is in some state of function, maybe not a good one, and you're interested in being able to make some changes to it. Well, you could use the local admin account if you have one. Various MDM services will allow you to set this up. But maybe that's a static password, which you're not really excited about, or it's a random password, but it's a little bit harder to get to. So with us, you'll be able to walk up to that machine, sign in as a username and password from Okta, and you'll now have a user on that machine and you can do other things with it. The really nice thing about that is that all of the user validation is done off box and all of the logging is done off box. So when we use the Okta Authentication API, you're more than welcome to go through Okta and find all the logging and everything else like that. So you do have a nice, secure off-box audit trail of who signed into what machines. So that's a very cool thing. We're seeing a lot of people using that, and a good reason to keep NoMAD Login Plus in place as you go forward. So a couple of different ways of thinking about it. Some people just use it for the initial setup. Some people use it full time. Some people just need it for the initial setup, but they like the branding and everything else so much that they're thinking about using it full time. So a couple of good ways of doing that. We've got a question about the full disk encryption. Does it enable it for multiple users or just the first user? Right now in version 1.1, it just does it for the first user. And the follow-on question is, does that user have a secure token? Why, yes, in fact, that user does. That's how FileVault works and why it works for them. However, for version 1.2, we will give you the ability to have multiple accounts be enabled for FileVault at the same time. So if you do have this local admin account and you let us know the name of that local admin account, we will enable that for FileVault at the same time as we enable the brand new user. And that we're pretty excited about because it will give you an opportunity to have multiple admins with secure tokens on that machine. One that the user knows and one ideally that you know, so that you're able to go in there and make the changes and the updates that you need to. So great question, and we're glad that we can give a little bit more kind of flexibility to this, in particular on those 1013 APFS systems, where otherwise there's a little bit more complexity to the management of that. All right, so now time for a demo. So we've got a machine here. I'll make this a little bigger so it's as easy as possible to see. This has just been set up in DEP. We saved you the 3 or 4 minute boot time, so you didn't have to see that, but trust us, we booted it. It's in a VM, so we're safe. We're going to pick United States. We're going to pick the US keyboard. And this is where we're actually going to be offered to set up the machine in the device enrollment program. So we're going to hit continue. This is now enrolling the system into our MDM server. So the MDM profile comes down. We're starting to get managed by that. And we'll also have one package. NoMAD Login Plus is about 8 megs, has a couple of scripts, or not a script, but a post install that works with it. I'll show you that in a little bit. We're going to pick a time zone. San Antonio. We never get Austin just right. Dallas, San Antonio, Dallas. All right, well, San Antonio's close. So this is now going through that setup process. We will be downloading this 8 meg package, which is our login window. And then we have a configuration profile, which will set things up, such as the logo and the background picture. There is not much of this to be done. It's very simple. The user is now finished with any sort of configuration. You notice the user was not asked to set up an account or do anything else like that, and we immediately go into our branded login window, at which point I can type in my username and password in Okta. I now get offered which MFA I want to use. If I have multiple ones, I can put in that. We're going to use Duo right now. So now the Duo window is popped up. Send me a push. You can't see this, but my phone just buzzed. I'm looking at my phone and authenticating. Now my user account is being created underneath the covers here. And then we are handing off the username and password to the built-in system authentication mechanism. So that will actually be validating the user. And then there's a few things here that happen. We're also enabling FileVault. We'll show you that in a little bit. So FileVault is being turned on. That's another reason why this might take a second or two more. And then the home directory is created, and we now are then going to be in the Finder. So it's a very seamless experience with all this in here. You can see this is kind of the setting up your Mac for when you create a new account. All of that is exactly like it was with the using all of the Apple mechanisms in the login window. So the user has a very Apple experience, and then a few seconds later is put here right into the Finder. So some really, really cool stuff. If we go down to System Preferences, show you a few things here. You can see if I go to Profiles, here we have our MDM profile. Here we have the File Vault redirection profile. All of that's the same. Here we have our settings for NoMAD Login Plus. You can see that we're using the snow picture for the desktop. We have some settings for NOMAD Pro in there as well, just for fun. And the fact that we're creating admin users and we're enabling the FDE recovery key to be stashed locally. If I go over here to users and groups, you can see now that I am a standard local user. I'm an admin, but I'm otherwise a local account. I'm not a mobile account. I don't have any strings attached to other directory systems, which is great. I could change my password here if I wanted to, do other work within this space, change my login picture from, it looks like an eyeball, but it's not. If I go back up here to security and privacy, you will see that File Vault is already enabled and it is already encrypting. So we're really excited at a lot of the cool things that we can do in this, like I said, unique space where we're at the login window. We can be root, we can be the user themselves, and do a lot of cool things in that space. So that's the basics of NoMAD Login Plus. We've got a trial version that you're more than welcome to download. That's on our wiki that and we'll put it in the Slack channel as well. So if you haven't played around with it, you can. And it really is pretty much that simple to set up. If we go down here to the Finder, I'll make this larger so that you can see it. We can show you a couple of things. And if I do a security authorization, DB read system login console, you can now see that we've added our own mechanisms in place here. There's a few more that we talked about. Here's the CheckOkta. Here's some power control that allow those sleep and restart buttons to work. Here's the CreateUser mechanism. Here's the DeMobilize mechanism that we have. And then here at the end, after the user has been validated, here's where we enable full disk encryption. And then we've got some fixes for Sierra that make things just run a little bit faster. So that's kind of the standard build out that we have here. A good question, since I brought it up, if you change your password here in system preferences, if I go back here and I go to users and groups and then I do change password, if I were to change password here, it will not push up to Okta. Instead, this will change the password locally. Our answer for that, if you want that answer, is if you're using NOMAD Pro, it'll sit up here in the upper in the menu bar. And NOMAD Pro would allow you to keep your password synchronized between Okta and the local system. In some cases, people want that. In some cases, people don't. So we've got the ability to have an either or in that respect. And then the other thing we'll show if we go into cdvar db, LSALRT, you'll notice a couple of things. We've got a NoMAD AD CreateUser. If I cat that out, you can see this is just a handy little file that's down here that we created the user account, Joel. So that way you know what's been created by NoMAD. And then if you ask us to write out the personal recovery key, that's here in this NoMAD FDE setup file. And then here's the actual File Vault recovery key. This is where it's been encrypted by the MDM public key and will be uploaded into MDM in the next couple of minutes whenever the MDM client does an inventory check-in with the MDM service. So exactly like just kind of a normal environment would look like there. So cool, some cool things around that. Demo worked, which is always exciting. So we'll go back to the slides and talk about a few more things. So for MDM requirements, if you're using NoMAD Login with an MDM service, what do you need to have in place? Is there anything funky? No. There's only two things that you really need: the ability to deploy a package, because NoMAD Login Plus comes as a package, and then the ability to have a configuration profile. So the configuration profile will have all of the what logos to use, what your Okta endpoint is, all of those things are in that configuration profile. So the two of those things together are pretty much all that you require. If you don't want to do this via MDM, if you're using something like Monkey or some other tools to install these packages, you are more than welcome to use that as well. There is not an MDM requirement for this. Again, it's just a package and a configuration profile. If you have alternative ways of deploying both of those, you're more than welcome to do that. It will make things like the device enrollment program a little bit harder, but you've probably already gone down that path at that point. Again, the packages and configuration profiles, all preferences are done via configuration profiles. All of our products are that way, so you don't have anything proprietary that you need to mess with, and all really works well. The biggest thing about MDM, if you don't have one and you're looking for one, to work best with NoMAD Login Plus, the MDM server needs to support the await config command. And what this does is this requires the system, when you're doing a DEP enrollment, that between when the package is installed, you see that kind of clipboard with the checkboxes on it. So instead of going directly to the login window, which before we get installed would be the standard Mac OS X login window. So instead of going directly to the Mac OS login window, you'll then wait until our package is installed. In the demo that I showed you, that gives you that MDM server is using the wait config, and you can get that very, very seamless experience such that you go directly from setting up the machine to our login window. The user doesn't have anything jarring with the existing login window. If your MDM server does not support a wait config, what you're going to see, the user will pick the time zone. They will then see the existing or the traditional, I don't know what to call it now, the Apple login window. It's at that point, they won't be able to sign in because they don't have an account on the machine, and that login window is not being Okta enabled. So within a few seconds, you can install our package will finally hit, and then you can do a post-install action of kill all login window. This will kill the login window process. When it reloads, it will now have our plugin in it, and then you'll see our login UI. So a couple of things, we're happy to help there and give you a better idea of some of those configurations if you're looking at that environment. So NoMAD Login Plus, currently at version 1.1, been shipping for the last couple of weeks. So it's out there, it's in production, good stuff. But since we are always a little, in some cases, too quick to talk about what else we're working on, I wanted to show you some parts of NoMAD Login 1.2. So one of the first things we're doing is a EULA, or acceptable user policy window. Apple's got a built-in banner that you can put up there, but it has to be an RTF, which is a little weird. The RTF has to exist locally on the machine. And you don't get a really good concept that they've authenticated or done anything else. They just hit a button. So in this particular case, we've got a terms and conditions set that you can put up here. All of the text that you see, the terms and conditions, the subhead there, and then the text in the window is all configurable through a configuration profile. So if you need to change your user agreement at some later time, you can easily update that all just by changing the configuration profile and not having to push a new file out. The other thing that we like about this, you can have this after the user has actually logged in. And if that's the case, we'll actually write out a file with the username of the person who actually clicked on this. If you have it before the authentication, we'll still write out that file. We just don't know who the user is at that time. So you give you a little bit more flexibility in there. If they hit cancel, it won't sign them in, takes them back to the beginning. While this was kind of specifically set up to be an end user license agreement, you can have any text that you want here. So if you wanted to make your users aware of the corporate cafeteria and the special that they have coming up on fish and chips, you'd be able to do that through this facility and run it through a configuration profile. So a couple of fun things that you can do there. Secondly, we're very excited about this. If you have done much work in the device enrollment program with your Macs, you may have come across another product that we have called DEP Notify. DEP Notify is a little splash screen that allows users to understand what's going on and have some availability there. We have put all of that code, it was kind of a forklift. It was easier than we thought it would be. And we've put that into a login window mechanism. So this gives you a way at the login window of showing a progress bar to your users and then updating some text as they go along. Really, really cool stuff that you can do with this. If you're looking at installing packages before the user has signed in, you can then show this before the login window, or before at least the UI for taking the username and password. You could run some scripts. That scripts could write out some text to the DEP Notify control file, that text will update the UI as they go along so users know that something is happening. With this mechanism, you can run the same mechanism multiple times during the login window process. So it's possible to run this mechanism before users sign in and then have it run after users sign in with perhaps a different set of configurations, packages, whatever else. So we give you some really, really cool ways of doing some just kind of interaction with the user. One use case that we already have for this is for sites that are interested in doing some sort of security posture check before the user can even sign into the Mac. So again, you can run this before the login window, the UI itself is actually run. You can make sure, is this 10.13.4? Are some, certain security policies or other things in place? If not, remedy the situation and then reboot the Mac. Otherwise, show them the progress bar until you're done looking at all the things you need to look at, and then move them on to the login window. So some really cool things that you can do and set up in that fashion. All right, so with NoMAD Login Plus version 1.2, we're going to have at least 4 new mechanisms. The EULA one, the notify that we've already talked about. We've got a run script mechanism that will allow you to run arbitrary shell scripts or other binaries that you want at various times within the login window process. So if you want to start off something with Monkey, do something else, maybe run trigger scripts with your Jamf install, all of that can be done by the login window itself running a script. Since we are or do have the ability to run as root, that run script can run in a privileged fashion, so it can run with a root context. That we expect to be used hand in hand with the notify mechanism. Your run script would kick off your installation process. While that's running, the login window would show the notify mechanism, so that way you'd have some way of updating your users and showing them the progress was being made. Finally, we have a keychain add mechanism that will be part of NoMAD Login Plus 1.2. That will be a way of taking that username and password that the user has signed in with and turning that into a keychain item. We're going to be a little selfish. The first use case for this is going to be NoMAD Pro. So you can sign in with NoMAD Login Plus at the login window and automatically have that keychain item for NoMAD Pro with that username and password already put into it. So when the user goes to use NoMAD Pro for the first time, they don't have to put in their password. Very, very seamless, very, very good user experience is what we're shooting for there. For release, we hope to do this at Octane 2018. If you're an Okta customer, which you probably are, why you're here on this webcast. We will be at Octane. We'll have probably a very small table somewhere in the back of the vendor room. So please, if you're going to be there and you'd like to speak to us, let us know. We have a much larger space that we can have meetings at and other things. So we'd love to talk to you, but otherwise we'll be there. So come by, say hi if you see us. Otherwise, let us know that you want to chat. We're happy to do some personal demos and other things at Octane. So if you're going, hope to see you there. If not, that's when we're going to release NoMAD Login Plus version 1.2 anyway. Corresponding with that NoMAD Login Plus, we'll also have a new version of NoMAD Pro. So again, version 1.2. We've got YubiKey support in it, the branded sign-in dialog, show you that in a little bit. Actions menu, so if you like this in NoMAD, that actions menu is coming to NoMAD Pro. And also big thing that we can do is now password changes via Kerberos. Previously with NoMAD, you had to wait until Okta wanted you to change your password. There wasn't any way to do it preemptively. So now we'll have a password change mechanism, a menu item that the user can use. If they want to engage in that, this will then do it via Kerberos back to AD, or we'll open up their Okta user page where they can change things in there. So a couple of different cool ways of doing that. Here's a quick little preview of the UI. On the left there, you can see the menu, and the actions menu is there. And then on the right is our new sign-in window with that logo. Keep in mind that logo isn't square. It's actually kind of a banner. It expands across that whole space. So if you're interested, you can actually have a very horizontal image that you can put up there. So we're hoping that some people have some very cool ideas of what they want to do with that. We do have a beta of NoMAD Pro version 1.2 already available. That's at files.nomad.menu, NoMAD Pro current beta.dmg. Keep in mind in the font, and this is, we'll fire the designer on this, needs to be capitalized in the correct way, or else I think CloudFront doesn't get it. So NOMAD Pro is capitalized the NOMAD way, and then Pro, capital P, capital C in current beta, and capital B in beta. We'll post this into the Slack. If you're not a member of the macadmins.org Slack, that's where we can do a lot of our interaction. You're more than welcome to reach out to Josh and I there. We have a channel on NOMAD. We have a channel on NOMAD Login. We have a channel on NOMAD Pro. We even have a channel on NOMAD PKINIT. So you can get all of those things taken care of in that fashion. If you're not a member of that Slack, please go there. It's free, easy. You can join, I think, 15, 20,000 almost Mac admins now. So it's a really, really cool place to be for the community. So we'll post that beta link in there as well. For the release of NOMAD Pro 1.2, we also plan on doing this at Octane as well. So Octane's at the end of May. So in about a month and change is when we'll have all this done. Finally, if you have any questions, anything we didn't answer as we've gone through this webcast, please feel more than free to reach out to us, sales@nomad.menu. That will get to people that are much more responsible than Josh and I are for getting back to you. They'll make sure that they answer your questions, any sort of help that you need as we go through this process. And if you're also interested in things like you've got a very exotic workflow with maybe a different identity provider or something else, and you're interested in knowing, would this be able to all fit, or do we have anything that we could help with? Please send those in to sales@nomad.menu as well, and we'd be more than welcome to work with you and go through that process. Finally, our webpage, nomad.menu, where we can go. We've got information on NOMAD Pro. We're going to add in a bunch of NOMAD Login pieces up there right now, so you can get some understanding of that as well. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your time. Love interacting with the community, love getting questions and other stuff from people, and how we can help about that, as this is, we think, is a very exciting time. There's a lot of cool things. It's a whole different paradigm that we're now seeing users and customers being interested in, where you've gotten away from kind of what traditional directory services were and now looking into much different ways of doing these things. And so we're very excited to be helping you to support that, and with some of the things that we can do now, and then with what we'll be able to do in the future. So, and as before, we're going to take the best of this webinar or the one before, the recording, and then we'll put it up on YouTube here by the end of the weekend. So thank you very much. Hope everyone has a good day. Thank you very much for attending. See ya.